Hi all, it is Ned again. Thanks for joining me. Can you all see my screen? I did this a little bit differently this time, so if you could, someone give me a quick response, let me know that yes, you raised your hand, so hopefully that means yes, you can see it. Super. So today we're going to talk a little bit about test anxiety, something that I spent a lot of time, got folks raising their hand, spend a lot of time talking with folks about. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Rishi, for the help. So, my job is a test prep guy, right? A test prep geek. I help people prepare for the content and some of the tricks we talked about for the SAT, for the ACT, for tests for graduate school, all this kind of stuff. But a huge part of what I do is what I kind of euphemistically think about as test prep therapy. As I see it, there are many, many, many people, including probably some of you who might be on this webinar today, who are really good students. They're really bright, they're capable, they work hard, and yet they don't do quite as well on these standardized tests as you would seem to think, right? I do great at math, I'm a really strong reader, but what's the deal? Because my grades are here and my scores are there. And sometimes that's just the nature of the SAT and the ACT. They do an okay, but not really great job of really aligning with what you know in school or what you learn in school. But also there are people where the content and the knowledge really does align well, but still people underperform on the test. That is not the slide I wanted to start with. So let me go back to the beginning. Oh, I'm almost there, I promise. Okay, so test anxiety, why we get it and what helps. I've written a couple books about some of this stuff. Certainly as I go through talking about this stuff, raise your hand up, put a question in the Q&A if there are things you want me to expand upon. If there's specific things that you have questions about and wondering how what I'm talking about is particular or pertains to you. I'd love to have this be a conversation as much as we can through the platform of Zoom. So let's jump into this a little bit. So here's a quiz. Some of you may get this right, but I'm in a perfect world I can help you guys get this wrong. And I do this with students one-on-one. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to add numbers in your head. Okay? Add numbers in your head. Please don't use a calculator. It takes away all the fun. Don't write it down. That takes all the fun away. And what I'm going to try to do is to get people to add incorrectly. So I'm going to take 2 note cards here. So we got 1, 2, okay. And I'm going to put the right answer on the back of that card. Okay, and the wrong answer on the back of that card. Okay, you ready to play? All right, so here we go. So take 1,000 and add 40. Okay, 1,040, right? Add 1,000 to that. 2,040, right? Add 30. Now add 1,000. Add 20. Add 1,000. Add 10. Okay. Anyone, quick answer? Anyone? 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 Anyone get this? Anyone get this? A couple have raised their hands. Da-da-da. Okay, anyone got that one? 5,000? I have some news for everyone. It's not right. Wait, how many do this? Actually, it's not right. And you might be like, what? How did I get that? Okay, so I want to go back and do this one more time, okay? So let's see, Felicia. I've never done this raising your hand thing. So let's see here. I can call on her. How do you do that? How can I turn on? Anyway, type your answers into the chat because that's all the technology that I can. So we're going to go back. So take 1,000. We have 1,040, right? Add 1,000, so that's 2,040. Add 30, 2,070. Add 1,000, 3,070. We're almost there. Add 20, 3,090, right? Add 1,000, 4,090. Now add 10. If you're still getting this, I'm sorry because I'm driving you nuts. But if you have 4,090, 90 plus 10 is what? 4,100. Now, let me explain this to you a little bit. But first, let me tell you a story. I have a friend who's a bond trader on Wall Street. So basic bond traders are enormous math geeks, and they do all the stuff on Wall Street, blah, blah, blah. And I did this with her, and I did it super fast because if I put a little pressure on people, and I can see when they're adding and do this, I can almost always get people to say 5,000, sometimes 6,000 if you go one too far. But of course, it's 4,100, and pretty much everyone falls for that because this doesn't have anything to do with your math ability. It has to do with how human brains work. Okay, so I may have talked about this before, but let me go through this. It's a really important concept in educational psychology called working memory, also sometimes described as fluid reasoning. And working memory is the ability to hold things in your head and do something with it. So if you're working through a math problem, if you're trying to figure out, oh, I got to get to my friend's house, but there's a traffic jam, what are all the different paths I can take to get there? It can be if you're doing a debate in school and this person says something and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to make this response, but then you think about a couple other things. How do we juggle things in our head? So part of that working memory is kind of scratch paper. It's also, though, used for reasoning, for decision-making, for problem-solving, and as we'll talk about for anxiety, it's also used for cognitive and emotional flexibility, the ability to put things in context, okay? So what I've done with this little trick is I have 1,000, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then 40, 30, 20, 10, 8 times, 8 numbers. And all the people who are experts on these say that human brains can really hold on to 5, maybe 7 pieces of information. And I went right past that. So your brain is looking for some pattern, for some system, and it knows that 90 and 10 rolls over, because it does, and we kind of reflexively roll it over into the thousands column rather than the hundreds column. Okay, nifty little trick I tried to play on you guys. Why does this matter? Well, this explains why when we take tests, we make mistakes and we go back later and say, wait, how did I do that? There's a problem, I don't have my test with me, but years ago, so I go and take the SAT with folks your age, which is weird, I know, but here's what it is. So there's a problem that was this, and then it asked, what's the perimeter? Well, if you do a little bit of geometry, you figure out that that's an equilateral triangle, and 6 plus 6 plus 6 is 18. And for reasons that I still can't figure out, probably on this bubble, and we'll talk about that later, I mark the answer as 12. And you're like, 12? What the? Give me a, it was number 2. Number 2 on the test. I routinely, pretty routinely get 1,600 on the SAT, 1,590, 2,400 on the old thing. I don't have many skills, but I'm pretty good at these stupid tests. So it's like 12, huh? And we all do this. And so a lot of times I have people say, oh, I make stupid mistakes. From my perspective, there are no stupid mistakes. The kind of mistakes you can make, you can either miss something because you flat out don't know how to do it. Okay, that's not a mistake. It's something you don't know how to do. You can blame that on your teacher. You can blame it on me, blame the test makers, blame anyone you darn well please. But you should have no expectation that you can or should get right something you don't know how to do. On the other hand, though, there are questions that you do know how to do, and you got them wrong. And those are the things that I really care about today in this conversation about test anxiety. Those almost always, those silly errors, the stupid errors, those dumb errors, whatever people like to call them, and I don't really like dumb, but we'll talk about that later too. They're almost always issues of attention, that for just a moment you're thinking about something else. And that's one of the things that anxiety or test anxiety does, is make us start thinking about something else. For those of you who play sports, the easiest concept is sort of taking your eye off the ball. And you're going to make the throw before you catch it, you won't make the catch, right? I play tennis really badly, and it's so hard not to look up into the court. Where am I trying to hit it? And guess what I miss when I'm looking at the court rather than the ball? The ball, and I don't hit the ball cleanly. Does that make sense? So that was the end of my mean little pop quiz. Let's keep going. All right, still not the right button. Maybe. We're gonna try this. Ah, you're nuts, right? You're like, what are you talking about? So here's the idea. There's a fantastic researcher named Sonia Lupien. And she has this acronym of what makes people nuts, okay? What makes you crazy, right? N is novelty. This coronavirus, oh, it's not just the coronavirus, people. It's the novel coronavirus. Like, we got the new one. Yay. Novelty is exciting. Like, if you're shopping, like, I've never seen that before, or a new movie. But particularly under circumstances like standardized tests, novelty is actually pretty threatening to us because we don't know quite what to do with it. U is unpredictability. This is why for a lot of people taking this test so hard, am I going to finish, am I going to not finish? If you knew that you would finish the test and didn't have to worry about it, you wouldn't worry about it. If you knew on the flip side that you're not going to finish the test, or no matter what happens, you're not going to finish the test, well, that would actually be helpful to you, because what it would tell you is, if I knew I wasn't going to have time to finish 3 math problems, then it simply becomes a strategic question of what 3 questions do I not do? Because gosh darn it, if the 3 questions I don't have time to do, I sure want to make sure it's the 3 questions that I friggin' don't want to do anyway. Does that make sense? So unpredictability, this is why practice is so important. We'll talk about all these things at the end. Perceived threat. Now, up until, I don't know, March 15th, most of us probably had very few physical threats on a day-to-day basis. Now, every time I go shopping, I'm like, I'm going to die, right? But up until then, the biggest threat that most people, particularly your age, felt was really threat to ego, right? School can be intense because if you make a mistake, you go, do people think I'm stupid? Does my teacher not like me? You know, social media, all the kind of things that are really part of being a teenager. And this isn't meant to be you teenagers kind of thing. It's simply the idea that from a brain perspective, people your age are much more attuned to the approval of people around them, particularly of peers. You're supposed to be, because at your age, you're supposed to really spend a lot of time and energy figuring out how you fit into this world. And largely, that's feedback that we get, bad and good, from people around us. So the perception of threat, how other people perceive you becomes very threatening. And this goes back to where I started up with, if you're a really academic kid, you get beautiful grades, right? And then you get a score that you're like, what? I so often have the experience people mutter things like, but I thought I was so much smarter than that. And I hear you on that, but I won't take a lot of time talking about this. But if you think that the SAT or the ACT is a test of your intelligence, please stop. Please stop. There's just nothing to support that. It is fair to say that it's a test of learned skills, that it can assess stuff that you know, because if you don't know, I don't know, trigonometry, which we talked about last week, if you're like, what the heck is a radian? You're not going to get that right. Does that make you dumb? I don't like the word. Does it make you dumb? No, it makes you ignorant, meaning you haven't learned that stuff yet, okay? But you can't do well on the test without knowing stuff. The challenge is, of course, we've already talked about this, you can know stuff and not do well. And it's that gap that I want to close. And then the last thing on here is a low sense of control. The people who are experts on these make the point that it's this low sense of control that is the most stressful thing really in the universe, or at least to human brains, because you can handle new situations and unpredictability. Even people kind of feel threatening you or making fun of you, if you feel like in that situation there's something you can do. Actually, the book that I wrote, I think I talked about this before, The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control. Where is it? More control over their lives. Because from both a motivational perspective and also a stress perspective, when you feel more in control of your life, I can handle this, or this is my life, I get choices, everything goes better. This, by the way, is the fabulous William R. Stixrud, clinical neuropsychologist, so he knows lots of stuff about brains, some of which I'll share with you today. So a lot of what I want to talk about today is what gives you a greater sense of control in this situation where these tests can feel threatening, where you may feel like you have a low sense of control, it's novelty, blah, blah, blah. So let's keep going. So what exactly is going on with the stress response? So you probably know the concept of fight or flight response, running from the dog. This is hilarious. So I live right behind several friends in DC, and I came out, this is some years ago. I don't know, it's the middle of June, it's, you know, Wednesday morning, it's 6:30 in the morning, I'm old, so I get up early. I go and grab the newspaper, and I'm walking back, and I'm wondering, geez, what are the Nationals up to? And I'm sort of walking, and as I'm walking back towards my house, I stop, and I look. And my neighbors have this great big house, and great big lawn, blah, blah, blah. And at the far end of this lawn, there are these two dogs. This is why this dog pups in here, kind of little fluffy little dog, and then a big sort of Doberman-looking dog. And the big dog turns and looks at me, and then goes, and as fast as he can friggin' run, he goes from 0 to 50 or whatever dogs do. Holy smokes, you have never seen anyone, at least never seen me, run so damn fast. And so the question is, does that dog get to me before I get to and through my front door? And what was stunning was there was no thinking like, huh, I wonder why he's coming at me so fast. I wonder if I could calculate his actual, no, all thinking has gone completely bye-bye, and I just running from my life in the front door, slam the door, oh my gosh. Because if there's an existential threat, a physical threat to my well-being, the person who stops and thinks, bad things happen. But most of us don't have dogs running at us during the middle of a test. We have things that are stressful, not quite that stressful. And before the fight or flight, there's the freeze response. And that's what we first do. If you get a text or someone does something about your social media, or you said something that you didn't, that other people, and they say, did you say that? And you're like, kind of that look, that freeze thing is what we do first. And then it has to go higher for that for us to actually want to run away or fight someone. Yeah, okay, I'll go through this. So from a brain perspective, the two parts of the brain that matter, there's something called the prefrontal cortex on the left-hand side that lies right behind your forehead. And that's where I said working memory, right? The ability to hold information in head, decision-making, problem-solving, cognitive and emotional flexibility are all executive functions, you might have heard that term, that reside in the prefrontal cortex. So when we're in our right minds, this part of our brain runs the rest of our brain. And so something pops up and you go, that's a challenge, but I got a plan for that. Ooh, that's a weird math problem, but oh, I can plug in numbers, all that stuff we talked about before. When we're in our right minds, the prefrontal cortex is running everything else, and we've got a plan for things. Smack dab in the middle of your brain is a very primitive part of the brain called the amygdala, and it perceives and reacts to threat. It doesn't think. It's not capable of rational thought. All it does is perceive threat and then react to it. So when that dog came running at me in a heartbeat, and I just, as fast as I could go, and there was no thinking apart from where's the safest place for me to go to immediately. The problem is this. This is the only threat detection system that we have. And so it will respond to a paper tiger the same way it will to a real tiger. And so we all have that experience of things that are not physically threatening to us, but we feel, oh my gosh. Have you ever had the experience when you're in a test or any social situation and you feel your stomach drop? What that is all of the blood in your abdomen basically leaving those organs and going to, this is great, going to your butt and your legs. You're bringing oxygen and energy to the major muscles that are responsible for the flight response. Because digesting food, that's why we feel upset, our stomachs get upset when we feel queasy. A lot of kids who had anxiety in middle school would have a stomach ache every morning because whatever they were anticipating during the school day, it was messing with their stomach. There's something called the vagus nerve that goes right from the amygdala straight to your stomach, okay? The problem is this, when the amygdala flares and puts us into this freeze, fight, or flight response, thinking goes bye-bye. And that puts us in a really hard situation. So some situation, social anxiety. There are a lot of people who are very comfortable with their friends, but they don't want to have to give class presentations because they feel like all eyes are on them. Well, all eyes are on them, but they feel like they're being judged. We're back to that perceived threat, right? Kind of intense. Anyone had this experience? This is my favorite cartoon a friend shared with me. Right? Who hasn't had that from time to time? And what's going on there in the top cell, in the top picture, your brain has flooded with cortisol and dopamine, norepinephrine. They're neurotransmitters. And there are too many of these things in your brain. We're going to talk in a minute about how a little bit of this is good. There's a certain perfect amount of neurotransmitters of dopamine and norepinephrine that really fire you up. But too much completely makes you, and you just can't think straight. And so we just want to do everything we can to be in 1 + 1 = 2 territory, or at least I can figure this out territory, as opposed to, oh my gosh, this is completely overwhelming. Okay. Oh, sports, you know, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, anyway. Performance anxiety, it's curious, you know, most people are actually more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. Not that given the choice, you'd probably choose the death, but when they have surveys, people are actually more afraid of public speaking. So this, for me, even because I'm an old guy, it still feels a little intense because, yeah, you guys do it, you think I'm a dope, whatever. It's real, and these things are wired into our brains. But again, there are things that we can do that can help. So keep going. So this I just put together this a bunch of years ago about kind of all the things that can pop up in many ways all at once, particularly again for people who are a little bit closer to your age. I don't have much parental anxiety, sports anxiety, because, you know, I'm 50 and I don't do sports. So there's that. But what happens is when you're taking tests, any of these ideas can pop up, and they get these little bursts of cortisol, right? And your brain doesn't think that well, right? So let me tell you about this. This is a friend of mine, a former student of mine. He was this incredible athlete, recruited quarterback of the football team and lacrosse guy and blah, 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 but intense social anxiety. And so if you were taking a test side by side with him and you flipped the page and Kevin looked up and looked at you and you did the face to him, that was it. He was toast. And his score would fall like ka-chink, a grade or 2 or whatever, you know, 100 or 200 or 300 points on the SAT, because once he got that idea in his head that you thought he was a dope, he couldn't really think straight. Does anyone have that experience when you're taking the test and you know, you're taking your time, and someone else flipped the page, and you look up, and you realize that they've moved on to question 11, and you're still on question 5. Anyone ever have that experience? If you had had that experience, what do you do? Do you take your time? Do you go faster? Do you go slowly? What do you do? Looking for the response in here. If you put it in the chat, because I cannot quite figure out where this is. I freak out. Very common. Just keep going. Yeah, and the cures for me, and both of those are okay. I'll say when you freak out, you want to recognize, particularly if you feel your stomach dropping, that is this burst of this energy that speeds you up too much. And the most common thing that people do on tests when they get nervous is they speed up. And so paradoxically, what we want to do is go the opposite way and go slower, right? So I very consciously right now tried to modulate my speech. I have a tendency to, I'm looking for a test for 1 second. I have a tendency when I get excited, from Melody, can you watch the episodes you missed? Absolutely, Melody. They're all on the website. If you, in the link to the email that you get, it takes you back to the web page, and all these things have been recorded and they're uploaded. Last week was all the trigonometry stuff. When people stress, when people are excited, right, they speed up. Years ago, I was tutoring a kid at a local school, was in there, and this guy named Micah. You know, Micah was a baseball player. He looked like my pal Kevin here. He was just muscles everywhere, just muscles, 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 muscles. And there was some girl who was like a freshman or something who clearly had something for Micah, right? And so we're walking up the stairs, and this girl comes over, and she's like, "Hey, Micah," and she should have like taken a Sharpie and just been like, "I sweat you." She was so excited, she couldn't contain herself, and she's just talking like 1,000 miles a minute. And we do that when we're excited. We also do that when we're stressed. So one of the things that's really common, I'm just going to model this for you. This is a math problem from an SAT. Some of you might have done this from some while ago. And I'm going to model for you this. If you have a piece of paper, you can write the problem down and try to solve this. It's a little bit like 4100, more of a joke than anything, but you can give it a try. So here we go. Okay. The oxygen saturation level of a river is found by dividing the amount of dissolved oxygen river the water currently has per liter by dissolved oxygen capacity per liter of the water, and then converting to percent. If the river currently has 7.3 milligrams of dissolved oxygen per liter of water and the dissolved oxygen capacity is 9.8 milligrams per liter, what is the oxygen saturation level to the nearest percent? Now, it turns out that this problem is number 5. It really is nothing more complicated than dividing 7.3 by 9.8 and making it a percent. The problem with this wordy math problem is not the math, but the darn words, right? And a lot of people don't like word problems because we talked about that scratch paper, right? You're trying to hold 1,040, 1,040, all that in your head all at once, and it's a lot. Trying to hold that many words in your head at once is a lot. And so that can kind of overwhelm your brain a little bit. So the 2 first tips that I'll give you for test anxiety are: 1, put your work on paper. Do not use your brain as scratch paper, okay? Because the working memory, that ability to hold stuff in your head, it's the same part of your brain that you use for problem solving. Well, the paper is not going to solve the problem for you. So let's let the paper be scratch paper, because it frees up cognitive resources for you to do the thinking, okay? I spent a lot of time saying, please write it down, please write it down, please write it down. I've said this 1,000 times in 30 years of doing this. Don't use your head as scratch paper. That's what scratch paper is for. Put it down. The second thing, for really wordy word problems, making notes to myself, I'll try to get this out to a follow-up for you guys later. For wordy word problems, if you read the problem and it feels like you read it as fast as I did that, maybe that felt as overwhelming as what I just read to you, go back and read it slowly. And what you may have seen, I wrote down there, idiot speed. This is for a student years ago. Idiot speed for me means reading the problem so slowly that you kind of feel like an idiot because it's like really slowly, right? So the oxygen saturation level of a river, it's exciting, is found by dividing the amount of dissolved oxygen the river water currently has per liter by blah, blah, blah. And the point of this is twofold. One, ideally, you get to the bottom and you go, oh, I got it. And that's what I want to see. So for whoever's the back end, RH, I'm not sure what that is, what your full name is. For RH, when you freak out, that's what our brains do, and we, oh my gosh, and we almost always speed up. And so the purpose of reading it slowly is, again, two things. One, for you to go, oh, I get it, and kind of come back online so that we don't have one bad question cascade into another, to another, to another. The second thing that it does is increase that sense of control. And we said the first thing, right, the most stressful thing, where did it go? I'm still trying to get there. The most stressful thing that we can experience is that low sense of control. And so you may read that problem super slowly and get to the bottom and say, I still don't know how to do it. And that's fine. There's too many rest here, folks. And that's okay. That's okay if you don't know how to do it. But at that point, it becomes a decision. And when you go, huh, well, I understand the words, but I don't quite get what I'm supposed to do here. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to turn the page on that problem. I'm going to sort of pat myself in the back for being strategic, that I'm not going to be a kind of rat being run through a maze by the people who make this stupid test. That's not the right problem for me. And like I said before, that unpredictability, if we knew that you wouldn't have time to do 3 questions on a section, you go, well, that's one of the questions that I'm just going to guess, pick an answer on and go on to someplace else. Always, always, always for me, it is having people take the test in a way that they feel a sense of control, because when you have a sense of control, your brain works better. At a neurological, at a neurochemical level, your brain works better. And that's the best that we can hope for, right? Is that you do your best, whatever your best happens to be on that test. Okay. There's a question about videos. I'll talk about that later. So here's the good news. Okay, so this is something called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. It's created in 1922. It's been around for a long, long time. And you see on the y-axis going up and down performance, low performance to high performance. And in the middle, stress, across the x-axis, stress. And this is measured in something called salivary cortisol, which is basically cortisol. It's the principal stress hormone, and we measure it in our spit. And so we can do all sorts of things as scientists and stress folks out, for everything from public speaking to talking about tests to, you know, roller coasters, and see how much cortisol pops up in your spit. And the deal is this: if there's no stress, chances are there's no performance, right? If there was no downside, no stress for not like writing a term paper, would anybody ever write a term paper? I'm sure there's someone there who would, but sure as heck I would not. I always needed a little bit of pressure of a deadline to get on it. Okay, great. In sports, if any of you guys are athletes, you've at some point played against a team, you're like, oh, geez, these people are terrible. They can't catch the ball. They can't throw the ball. They can't do anything with the ball. Clearly, you're all going to win. But you're not going to play your best because you don't have to, because these people are just, yeah. You do your best. You play your best. You look really on when you play another team who's just as good as you are, shot for shot, you know, stride for stride. And ideally, you don't like them. That helps a little bit too. And this is what it puts us in a state of what is described as optimal arousal, meaning you're excited just the right amount. You're not bored too far out to the left, and you're not stressed out too far out to the right. A lot of the work that I do helping people prepare for these tests is taking people who are kind of over there in the distress level, like, whoa, and trying to bring them back to the middle so that they feel a little intense, but it's not overwhelming. True fact, a lot of science showing that you do better with some butterflies. If you feel completely blah, you're probably not going to do your best. So being a little bit on edge is actually a good place. We're just trying to figure out how to be there in the middle. Now, I said that we can measure this cortisol in our spit. The helpful thing to know here, or I think a useful thing for you, is that, helpful and useful being the same thing, that it's completely individualized. It's completely individualized. So we can have, you know, dozens of us in the same situation, and a dozen of us could say, this is great, this guy's got it nailed it, it's exactly where I am. And a dozen people have been like, this guy's the bozo, can he pick it up a little? Because geez, he's just kind of duh. And another, you know, dozen people are like, oh my gosh, can you slow down a little bit? And it's totally individualized. So different people are in different situations, but also for each of you, you all have situations where you can really tolerate a high level of stress because you have a lot of experience there, right? It's not novel, and you have a lot of skills there, and so you feel in control. Where other situations where you don't have experience or you don't feel in control, you want the stress to be less. And so I just want you to gauge this, because a lot of times when things don't go well, we start to jump to all kinds of conclusions of I can't and I'm no good and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of it may be nothing more than lowering the novelty, lowering the unpredictability, the perceived threat, increasing your sense of control, so you get in a place where you get that optimal arousal, okay? So how do we do these things? Let's go through these one by one, one by one. So how do you think about tests? How do you study for tests? And then what do you do for practicing tests? All right? Oh, and warming up for tests is my favorite things to talk about. So let's rock on. Now, with these tools, these are all based on science and one, my experience, students' experience, but also having read a lot by a lot of neuroscientists who know all about this stuff. Is there a perfect method for everyone? No, it really matters what feels good for you, and try these things out. And if you're like, oh, that was no good, fine. Go on to the next one. We all want to have at least a tool or set of tools that we know based on experience that worked for us. And part of that is that experience of doing things that actually gives them kind of power, right? Is anyone superstitious? Anyone superstitious? For people who are superstitious, I have the story that's in the Washington Post. You guys can go read it if you like, about my best friend who was a hardcore Cleveland Indians fan. And we're watching, it was the playoffs or something, World Series, were they in the World Series? Anyway, they're playing the Yankees, so I guess that would be the playoffs. Anyway, and I go down to his apartment, and I walk into, he's making nachos or whatever. I walk into his kitchen, and he's just put a baseball hat in the freezer. And I'm like, John, what? He's like, yeah, number 17. I'm like, what? He's taken a Yankees cap, again, his rival, taking a Yankees cap. He's took number 17, whoever was the starting pitcher, put it in the brim of the hat, and then put the whole thing in the freezer to freeze him out. And I looked at him like, you're nuts. We're back to our nuts, right? And he looks at me and says, you don't know it doesn't work. Because for a sense of control, it doesn't have to be that we're in control, but we feel in control. So if you have a lucky hat, lucky cornflakes, lucky socks, lucky warm-up, lucky song that you do for practice before a test, and you have a good test, then you've imbued that cornflakes, hat, warm-up, song, whatever, with almost kind of magical power that we can use over and over and over, because it puts our brain in that right place of optimal arousal where we feel excited but not overly stressed. So for all of these things, I want you to try these things and see what works for you. It might even be a combination. Okay, we'll get rid of this. So how you study for tests. There is a lot to be said here. The biggest piece of advice, and unfortunately COVID has made this a little bit easier, the single best thing that you can do, both for standardized tests and for tests in school, is to be well rested, because we go back to that prefrontal cortex that runs the rest of your brain, if you're in your right mind, and the amygdala, which is the threat detector. What ideally happens when you stress, and this amygdala flares, right? This part of your brain that puts things into context says, no, we got a plan for that. When we are tired, the connections between those two parts of our brain, the connection between the alarm and the, oh, we've got a plan for this, are really, really weak. So that's kind of a problem. So verbal retrieval falls apart, emotional control falls apart. I have the student I'm working with who's super sharp but complicated. He's both ADHD and anxious. And I was explaining to him, I said, you ever notice how when you're really tired, you feel like your mom's even more annoying than normal because the world just kind of feels dark. So your mom seems even more annoying than normal. And without missing a beat, he goes, my God, I must be tired all the time. And that's what we all kind of experience, right? When we're tired, things seem harder, the world seems darker. So, and that'll include standardized tests. If the problem seems hard, if you're well rested, this part works and you can figure out what's another way? Can I plug in numbers? Can I, is the picture drawn to scale? Should I skip it and come back later? We put things into context, and we're also a lot more creative with coming up with solutions. So if you're doing practice stuff, in a perfect world, try to do a practice section of the SAT, a practice section of the ACT, when you're well rested, because I want you to, again, much like Don with a hat, have the experience of having things go well. So you build more and more in confidence going into this. Exercise is great. We'll talk about that more too. The big reason for exercise is that vigorous exercise, particularly exercise that kind of blows off stress. I'm making notes for myself of things to add later. Vigorous exercise blows off cortisol. So when I got in the front door running away from that dog, I was, but in the 2 or 3 minutes that it took for my breathing to come back to normal, that deep breathing had flushed the cortisol, the stress hormones, out of my body and brain. I was still mad, like, whose stupid dog is this? Why is it not on a leash? But I had come back to the ability to think clearly. And so for those of you who even have the experience, if you freak out on a test, one thing that can be very helpful, again, to slow things down is to slow your breathing. Because any deep breathing mechanism basically is going from fast and shallow breathing to deep and slow. And that deep breathing, that extra oxygen, pushes out cortisol out of your body and again brings your brain more back online. Oh, quiz yourself, test yourself. There's a wonderful thing. I'm gonna make notes to myself. I will send this around. I did not put this online, but I'll send this because it's so good. There's a fantastically cool book, which I don't want you to read because it'll take you forever, but there's a 6-tip summary of this. And the book is called Make It Stick. And this applies for the standardized test that you guys are looking at, but also in school. And one of the things that the guy named Henry Roediger, who's a professor at the Washington University in St. Louis, coined the term the testing effect. In all his studies with NIH, it's actually called retrieval practice. But the idea is this, that quizzing yourself or testing yourself, and you guys know this from school, actually makes your memories deeper, makes them stronger. And so we want to do that as much as we can. And this is why practice tests, irritating though they are actually better than only doing worksheets or only listening to me or Khan Academy videos, because it makes those connections stronger. The act of working through 10 math problems and going, oh, right, plug in numbers, makes that a stronger connection so that when you get on the actual test and you panic on a problem, your brain goes, oh, wait, here's my method that I can use, okay? Tests or feedback. Right? Again, there are people who believe that the test, the SAT and ACT, is a test of IQ. The way that I think about this is people who do really well on these tests believe that the test proves or captures how smart they are. And people who don't do well on this test believe that this test really does a pretty lousy job of capturing how smart they are. In my view, I think both of those things are probably true. You don't do well in tests unless you know stuff. But as I mentioned before, you can know stuff and be really capable and confident, but not do well in this. But I really want you to think about this, because this is what the evidence supports most, is that these are tests of acquired skills. You guys are all wonderful learners, but if I'd given you this test in 4th grade, you would have bombed the math because you didn't know any of this stuff. Have you gotten infinitely smarter than you were in 4th grade? No, you kind of still have mostly the same brain, a little more grown up, I know. But the biggest thing is your knowledge has changed, okay? So when I have kids like, oh my gosh, I can't get this. Well, not yet, because we need to learn it, or we need to review it, or we need to do more practice on this. Now, obviously, there's some questions that are a little bit curvy, and sometimes we just don't see them under pressure. But please, 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 if you really feel this is a test of IQ, I'm happy to go mano a mano for an hour and tell you all sorts of wackadoodle books to sort of get rid of that, in part because thinking of these tests as tests of IQ or natural ability, one, it's threatening to your ego. We talked about the perceived threat, and is more likely to stress you out, and also leaves you nowhere, because if this is a test of native IQ, you're toast. There's nothing you can do about this. If this is a test of acquired skill or learned ability, you practice and you get better, like, I don't know, everything else in your life, okay? And then this Heidi Grant Halverson, she's up at Columbia and the whole Department of Motivation, and basically says, we want to focus on getting better, getting better, getting better. A lot of times we work with kids and they have 1,000 on the SAT and they say, what's your goal? And say, I want to get a 1,400. And I really work to not have that be your goal, but rather say our current goal is to get to a 1,200. Current goal, and it's really important to put that word in there. Not that I don't think that you're going to get to a 1,400. You can't get to a 1,400, but it's easier to work on the process of what do I have to do? What 4 more questions do I have to get right here and 4 more questions there to get from 1,000 to 1,200? Once we get to 1,200, make your mom take you out for ice cream or whatever, and then you say, what do I do to go to the next thing? If you ran cross country, you don't talk about going from a 10-minute mile to a 5-minute mile. You go from a 10 to a 9. Woohoo! From a 9 to an 8 bit by bit. When we focus on the process, everything about peak performance is focusing on the process, not the outcome. Because if you're focusing on the outcome, you're not focusing on the process. And if you're not focusing on the process, your process is going to be lousy, and then so will your outcome. When you focus on the process, and this is part of the getting better goals, when you focus on the process, you get a better process, then the outcome rises along with it. And again, like I talked about at the very beginning, focusing on the process is something that you can control. Lowers your stress, increases your performance. Okay, great. Questions in the Q&A, I will get to them, I promise. All right, how to warm up for tests. So there's a researcher, I don't have her on here, named Sian Beilock, of all things, S-I-A-N, Beilock, B-E-I-L-O-C-K. She is now the president of Barnard College, a long-term researcher, I think in Chicago. Fantastic human being. Curiously, and I think it matters for this, four-year college athlete, Div 1 soccer player. Remarkable, remarkable, remarkable. She has this wonderful book. Do I have it over here? Look it up, look it up, look it up. Nope, you're out of luck. With a provocative title of Choke. Choke. And Choke is all about underperformance on, I don't know, public speaking, athletics, maybe standardized tests. And she talks about, we go back to the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. She said, this part of your brain is basically the brain system used when you're a predator. And this is the prey. So when that dog was going after me, he had the prefrontal cortex engaged and I had the amygdala. And we don't want to be there on tests. So anything that kind of gets your swagger on, like, oh yeah, I'm all that, activates this part of your brain. And it's different for every single person. One of the big things that people often do is listen to music, because most of us have music that we listen to that gets us really into the groove. I had a student years ago who was recruited, actually, she played tennis at Colgate, so she was a serious hardcore athlete, also clinically anxious. Now, I talked about that curve. She could handle really high stress in sports, but standardized test freak her out. I would kind of the other way around. But I asked her, say, what are the tools that we can use that help you in tennis to use on this case, the LSAT for law school, mean test? And so we stumbled on music. And I asked her, I said, so do you listen to music before? She said, oh yeah, every single match. And I said, awesome. I said, what kind of music do you listen to? And she got a little sheepish and she's like, okay, so bad, angry rap. I said, that's perfect. Because a lot of that music is incredibly aggressive. It's angry. It fires up your prefrontal cortex. Sports teams, when they get fired up, it's all this bass, heavy, thumping kind of aggressive music. Nobody's like before their football game, la, da, da, da. I mean, that's not what we do because it doesn't engage this part of your brain that you want. Okay, so exercise, hugely helpful. Music, hugely helpful. Dress the clothes that make you feel like you're all that, whatever that happens to be. Whole bunch of different things that can work. Affirmations is a really interesting one. There's a body of research about what's called stereotype threat. And stereotype threat is the idea that if you're a member of a group about whom there's a plausible negative stereotype, then being reminded that you're part of that group can affect your performance. So the first work was done, this guy named Claude Steele, Professor Steele was out at Stanford, and he was looking at underperformance of black students compared to white students, and found that how they framed things made a huge difference, how they thought about this. Principally, if this was presented as a test of IQ, these kids would underperform relative to their peers. If they said it's just a test, of kind of nothing, there was no underperformance. One of the solutions became affirmations. Let me run through that really quickly. There's a writing exercise that has people write about either a core value, I believe in justice, I believe in environment, I believe in fairness, I believe in beauty and art, whatever. And another writing exercise that had people write about who I am as a person. So, you're a friend, you're a soccer player, you're a student leader, you're a member of your church, you're a terrific older brother, you're a terrific older sister, you're a wonderful singer, you're a snappy dresser, whatever. And the more of those things that you can write about that are really core to who you are as a person. I'm a person who believes in making the world better. All of those things. I'm committed, political activist. All of those things help people's academic performance, help people's performance in really everything. But in this case, standardized tests, because if I can get you to think that your whole identity is wrapped up in one of these ridiculous tests, and then I make you stressed, you're going to underperform on this test. If I make you realize all the things that make you you, that have nothing to do with the stupid test, and then I try to make you stressed, it's much harder to make this test feel stressful because you have all of this much more multifaceted sense of your identity. And so these affirmations include simply writing down on a regular basis, or even right before the test, who you are as a person, what matters to you. You know, I'm academic, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a great person. That will help feel less pressure about these tests, because these SATs are a really good measure of how well you do on the SAT. ACT about the same. Okay? I think that might have been it. Oh gosh, I goofed that up. So let me go back to here. So what kind of questions do people have? I'm going to run, I see a couple questions that are on here about the emphasis. Let me address that really quickly. And then if people have specific questions about them and what happens on a test, I have a couple of things I'm going to riff on, but let me talk here for one moment. Where on the website can I find the videos? So it should be right there when you go to, I'll pull up the email, we'll resend this. In the link, you should be able to go to, because I didn't make the email, I apologize, for the landing page for Prep Matters Television and then SAT, ACT. And when you go to that, you get a landing page right there, and all the past episodes are on there. If other people have been able to find those, maybe no one else has looked. And if it's not clear enough, I'll talk to my team and we'll send that out in the next couple of days. Is there an online resource where we can get free practice materials for the ACT like Khan Academy does for the SAT? Really good question. There are many, many, many PDFs of old ACTs that are kicking around online. Those are not done in collaboration with the ACTs, so they're not technically free and fair. To be honest, there are a lot of things on the website that on the internet that maybe haven't been released there with permission. So honest to gosh, I mean, I don't want to direct you to certain places because simply Google ACT PDF and you'll find a bunch of those things. There are some resources that are available through the ACT website itself. Obviously, one of the official ACT guides can help a lot. Yes, this, by the way, if you guys are interested, I rarely tout anything by the people who make these tests, but this is a pretty good resource, in part because in addition to having the practice test, they have explanation for every single question on here. Particularly for the nerdy math, that can help you quite a bit. They don't, of course, tend to show tricks. They tend to show things in the most mathematical way. So one thing, if you're going through that or any test, even if you've done it the real math way, but if you're like, geez, that was painful, it's a really solid idea to ask, is there a trick to that? And I'll say, you guys can, no one's taken me up on the offer yet, but if you're doing practice tests, if you have questions, you can feel free to email me. I'm just ned@prepmatters.com. I'm not going to write up 1,000 questions, but I'm happy to do a few of those. And I'm also happy to take any questions or question types that you guys find like really irritating and throw that into class for next time. Because obviously for those of you who are here, I want to make this as directed to you as can be, is what's helpful. I didn't say that clearly, but you get the point. What makes your approach different than other tutors? Some of the work that I do is different than what a class can do, because I can have actual conversations with folks in ways that are a little bit hard for us to do this now. I think if there's something that I think that I do a little bit better than some other tutors do, it's that I take really seriously the effect of stress on performance. I think for those of you who saw the presentation about plugging in numbers, back solving, using the answer charts, I told that kind of silly story about a student who's working with one of my colleagues, and when my colleague suggested, gosh, wouldn't that probably be easier if you did it by plugging in numbers? The kid's face sort of fell and said that his old tutor told him that plugging in numbers was for losers who couldn't do real math. There are tutors out there who I don't think they see this the right way. From my perspective, with this test, it's an issue of content. Well, you can get that from this book, right? You can get this from Khan Academy, from your math class. There's also a matter of process, right? And that was, the plug-in numbers, and that's just, those are just a few of the tricks, but also we're going to do a whole bunch of funky algebra next week where with systems of equations, we can do that by substituting one in terms of another. We can solve for X, we can solve for Y, or we can often do what's called linear combinations, and there's shortcuts. And so a lot of the work that I and my colleagues do is trying to get folks when they're taking this test to rather keep thinking, how should I do this? How should I do this? How should I do this? Which again creates perceptual narrowing. We talked about this before. Get you very stuck on this is how I'm supposed to do it, this is how I should, but it doesn't work. And I'm constantly trying to help people realize there's more than one way. There's more than one way. And the test doesn't care how you get the answer because you're just bubbling in B. So I take that, so that it's knowledge, it's process, and then it's all this kind of motivation and stress performance to this aspect, because almost always people are trying to find either they need a little bit more motivation for this or they need a little bit less stress. There are very few people who are perfectly right there in that place of optimal arousal where they're excited, they're alert, but they're not stressed. And so because stressors are highly individualized, to help you and any of you kind of know what the best, you know, where your relative weaknesses are and how do we make adjustments, how do we figure out what's stressful to you, we actually have to have conversations where you know, I'm paying enough attention to you, where you feel comfortable telling me what you're anxious about. I'll tell you what I think is a hilarious story. I had a student I was working with who was at boarding school. She took the extra time, she took the ACT with extra time because of anxiety, a very complicated kid. Even with extra time, was not able to finish. It was kind of a mess. Very, very anxious. She was trying to get 100% extra time, but the boarding school she attended did not allow that. So we're trying to make the best of what we can with limited time. So we went through this again. The old test used to have this big chunk of time and you could allocate it however you wanted. So we talked about, it was the math where she was most likely to get stuck and run short on time. And so I said, well, tell me more about what you need about getting stuck. Well, you know, I'll get a problem and I can't let it go. Okay, well, what do you mean? So yeah, I can't. Well, I end up rewriting it a bunch over and over. You end up rewriting. Well, tell me more. Like you write it and you make a mistake and you've got to write it again because you're in a hurry. Well, no, I have to rewrite it. I said, question, are you OCD, if you guys know OCD? Are you OCD? And she said, yeah, I'm really OCD. I said, have you always been this OCD? She said, well, it's gotten worse since I've come to boarding school because that's what her boarding school is like. And I said, but tell me more. Can you rewrite it? She said, yeah, it has to be right because it just looks wrong. If it looks wrong, it bothers me. And I asked her, I said, do you have synesthesia? And she said, no, what's synesthesia? So you have to reverse those. You can't say no if you don't know what it means. Synesthesia, if you guys don't know, means that when there's a cross-wiring of senses. So when she would see different letters have different colors, when you hear different sounds, you'll see different colors or even taste different things. And so for her, every single letter had its own color. And if her writing was sloppy, the colors changed in ways that bothered her. Well, goodness, that was a pretty important thing for us to work on. So she's a pretty extreme example, but I certainly see more kids than not who get overly stressed about this test. And a huge part of what I'm trying to do is to help you under pressure be in your right mind. Put simply, it doesn't matter fully how much hard work you take to put things in your brain if under pressure you lose your mind. Do you know what I'm saying? Melody, you raised your hand. I am absolutely struggling to figure out if you have a question for me, how to answer that, because I'm just not doing a great job with that. So if you know, oh, you did know what synesthesia was, so thank you for that. She raised your hand. I don't know how to do that. Melody, if you have a question you could throw into the chat, I would love it. Otherwise, I feel remarkably impolite because I'm ignoring you as you so politely raise your hand. But I don't know how to do that. Oh, wait. Oh, Melody, this is exciting. We're going to do this. We're going to allow, do you want to talk? I can allow you to talk. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. You can either, I'll allow you to talk if you want to throw out a question, or you can type it in. But you've been so polite, so I'm going to unmute you. So here you go. Maybe. Oh, good grief. I thought I unmuted you. I think I failed at that, Melody. Well, maybe the default setting is, can't mute. I think the default setting for these webinars, because we got Zoom bombed the first week we did this, that was ugly. So you're just going to have to type it in if you can. Okay, so hopefully, folks, that was a little bit, I don't see any more questions. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful about kind of test anxiety and some things that can help with. What I would say is that for any practice that you're doing, if you can answer these questions, sorry, if you can for practice, use one or more of these tools. Oh, there's Melody. Your question, Melody. Do you want to chime in? No, maybe not. Okay. So I'll just repeat this. For any of the practice that you're doing, if you don't yet have a method, try one of these. Try and listen to your favorite music before you play this. Go for a 10-minute run. Put on your favorite clothes. I had a student years ago, she wore the same outfit for every single practice test. Hilariously, none of these clothes were hers. She'd stolen a sweatshirt from Melody, you know, and the shoes were from Colin, or the hat, whatever. It was an entire wardrobe of clothes that she'd basically stolen from her friends because she loved her friends loved her, and they gave this kind of magic power to her test-taking wardrobe. So some of these things may strike you as silly. Don't do it if you feel silly. Some of them may feel useful. Some people don't like meditation. Some people hate meditation. But I suggest that if you haven't done anything yet, try these things, because these are all based in science. And most of all, they're designed to give you a greater sense of control during practice. So what they say in football, you practice like you play, so that when you get to the test, you can play like you've practiced. Because at the end of the day, the most I can hope for you, and the most you can hope for yourselves, is that you answer correctly what you know how to do, and you don't underperform simply because you're a little bit too jittery. We can anticipate the tests are going to make you nervous, because they kind of do. Even people in the room with you can make you nervous because we respond to that. And so we don't want to plan for, oh, I'll be totally chill. We want to plan for some intensity on the day of the test and give you a set of tools that, again, you feel a sense of control, even though there's other things that cause you stress. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to work on the follow-up email, because it sounds like a lot of people are struggling to find the videos, and I want to correct that. I have a few of these notes that I'll send along. Actually, there's an article I wrote for U.S. News and World Report, the college guide, the Infernal College Guide about test anxiety. So we'll send that along in the email as well. Thanks, as always, for listening. Again, please shoot us an email, tweet us, text, whatever. If you have questions or things you'd like to see us address next week and the weeks thereafter. Otherwise, I think we're on to math. Remind you to register for the ACT in June. If you haven't yet done that, there's one in July. I know that June is not likely. I know, though, that it is already going forward in both Texas and Georgia, because I have friends there who do test prep. So with any luck, for those of you registered for here in Maryland, it will go down in June. Otherwise, I'll plan for July. And at the very least, I'll plan to see you guys, I hope, next Tuesday at 5. Have a great week, all.